It's December 9th, 2014. I have two other points that I wanted to clarify about regarding some of the previous videos that I've made. And one point is something I want to add is at the place where I was tortured with Sandy there, and I had to be in a chair all the time while they were trying to teach me sexual things, and then I was getting tortured, as I've already explained. One of the individuals who showed up there actually was the mother of another one of the individuals who raped me later. So this was, he was a little boy at the time. He was younger than I was, and he was very little. But she was there. And it really starts connecting a whole bunch, several individuals who grew up who were later targeting me to rape me. And then connecting back to Ballingers, who are connected to a bunch of cops and FBI and people from Canada and the U.S. But I do want to mention that because she was there at the scene where I was being told I should drop this complaint. I had police there, and this was at Sandy's place, not at Lonnie's, one of those locations. But that I should drop this complaint, and then maybe I could go to college and something like that. And so she was she later at least was working for H&R Block. And at that time, back then, I think she was. I think she's been working for them for a long time. But if not, she was some kind of accountant or had something to do with that. But I almost vaguely recall that she was maybe even with the same business way back then. But like I say, I could be wrong about that, but I do know it was her. And I got introduced to her son when he was older, and her supposedly his sister. So a whole bunch of things that were happening to me and done to me that looked like they were just some natural occurring events, but not natural at all. I was really getting stalked, and had been set up by the United States government, I think, to look like a floozy when I was getting raped. And it was by individuals who had parents that worked for the government who tortured me and forced me to do these things under threat of death, basically. And the other point that I wanted to mention is with regard to seeing the Bob and Dixie twins, or triplets, whichever they may be, at various locations, but specifically when I saw the Dixie twins, or triplets, in the underground shelter place, when I was taken there several times. And I do remember a few of the times, even though I did eventually at some point get drugged whenever I was there, or electrocuted. They do one or the other or both. Almost every single time that I remember ever being there, at some point I got drugged. And so most of the time, I really just remember getting out of the car, and like, that's about all I remember. Driving there and then getting out of the car. But there was, and at first I thought there was only one scene where I was fully awake. That was one where I was fully aware all the way up to the point of seeing this underground shelter. But there were other times I was at that same location, and like the shelter part of the situation is kind of fuzzy to me, or maybe didn't stand out quite as clearly, but I still remember it. And then what did stand out was groups of officials or government employees or lawyers gathered around. And they had a number of government people showing up out there at the same time that they were swapping me back and forth. And I'm not sure why they would have, for example, I mentioned that they had judges out there. You know, it wasn't just lawyers that worked for the Department of Justice. They actually had some judges. You know, why would the United States want to bring judges along or have judges meet them? You know, and I think that, I mean, obviously it had something to do with getting judges involved so that they were compelled to keep a secret. And possibly because the government decided if anything gets out of our little net and goes into a courthouse, we want to have plenty of judges lined up who are willing and ready to testify on our behalf and lie, and squeeze out anybody who tries to say anything different, you know, as being nuts, needing a competency exam or evaluation, or trying to just drive them out of court by saying, you know, your opposing side got summary judgment against you because we agree with them. And they used, but still, aside from Supreme Court judges that I met, which was a whole other thing, which was pretty remarkable, all on its own. There were a bunch of local or state, I would say, you know, state and federal kinds of judges located from one state and then another state that were showing up at this twin/triplet swapping site where I was being taken to. So, and usually I was being taken to drugged or semi-drugged, like semi-conscious, or maybe I was there and fully aware, but then they would torture me after. I'm not sure if they were trying to make a demonstration to the judges about how, oh, look what we can do to her, and we can quiz her about it later, ask her tomorrow, and she won't remember anything. You know, because it temporarily would block some things from my memory, although it didn't have very much of an effect on my long-term memory. So I'm not sure, but I, you know, exactly what the point was. Maybe they were even getting money. I mean, I am positive that some of these judges and lawyers that were involved in all of this had to be getting rich. I mean, there was a lot of money involved in what they were doing. And almost all of them either got very secure jobs, like positions, or like, you know, very secure job security, I would say, or they got, or all of a sudden you'd find out when they had a brand new car, or suddenly after a couple of years and they thought everything was in the clear, it wouldn't look too suspicious, they ended up getting a brand new house. You know, it was kind of like when they decided their investment phase was paying off enough and they could make it look natural enough. They suddenly were getting these perks added in and just trying to write it off as, you know, their own success, whatever, their savings or a gift or some other random but natural sounding reason for acquiring some kind of a new large property or a large new kind of possession. So I'm sure that the motives were varied, but one of the judges that was out there at this Oregon location, and from what I know, this woman is, you know, maybe she moved from Oregon to Washington State, but she was in Washington State when she picked up my appeals case for the CPS case about my son. You know, the entire thing was fraud. The whole CPS, that entire thing was government rigged and orchestrated. But they wanted to make it look like it was going through all the channels, and yet they were directing every single aspect of it into the hands of someone that who had been working with them for decades on concealing government crimes against kids and parents. So this one woman one judge who was, I mean, there were a few, so I can name some of them. But one of them was Judge Weiss. Wise or whatever. And she was out there at that same place where they had double Dicksies. Or not doubles. Sorry, I don't want to say doubles, because that gives the wrong impression. Or has the wrong connotation. But identicals. The identical or Dickie twins or triplets. And then she was later taking my appeals case and running it into the ground. And, you know, several of the judges that I ended up running into for one reason or the other, they somehow just happened to get my cases. You know, and why is that? Because at least in the Oregon system, your judge is supposed to get things typically on a totally random basis. Kind of like a lottery draw. You know, a plaintiff and a defense party cannot pick or choose their own judge, and supposedly judges can't choose their own cases. It's supposedly like a kind of a circulating thing that just randomly happens, and on a certain day of the calendar, if you file your claim or whatever, a certain judge might get it. Well, my cases, any case I ever had, was getting directly channeled to someone that these various agencies that were torturing me and had raped me and orchestrated government strategies for forcing me to accept being raped. It was going to those judges. So it was always contained. You know, I mean, I was always surrounded by people who were so-called friends that weren't friends. And I was getting all of these cases transferred to people who then, you know, later in hindsight, when I remembered or stopped to think about different things that had happened in the past, because there were so many things to think about. I mean, they were moving me, you know, why it's not like I just remember automatically everything. They moved me all the time. They were constantly torturing me, constantly raping me, and constantly moving me. And when they weren't moving me from one location to the next, I was getting chained up. So there were these periods of time where I was just getting chained up and tortured. And then if I wasn't getting chained up and tortured or drugged, it was like boom, boom, boom. I was like on tour. And the reason they did that is because they didn't want me to have time to stop and think. And they didn't want me to have time to stop and develop any kind of relationships that might be normal or to my benefit with people who were not government affiliated. And then having so many different experiences all squished together like that, and being forced to jump from one thing to the next constantly, so I couldn't even focus on one thing for a split second before going to the next thing in a totally different location. You know, so they would try to abstract every single part of my life. You know, what happened over here in Wilsonville this week is suddenly now I'm in Moses Lake, Washington, and I'm in a bed getting chained up and I'm being drugged. So after I forget about being drugged and getting chained up, then I'm going to meet some kids and play with some kids that happen to be government kids. And I'll have some fun for a little while. But that's just going to be 1 or 2 days, and then all of a sudden I'm going to get transferred over to Kashmir. And, you know, they just kept bouncing me around like that. And their entire objective was to prevent me from having a streamlined, consistent memory of things as they progressed. They wanted me to forget parts of this and that, and to separate things, separate one thing from the other, so I wouldn't remember it. So then when they had these long separations of like a decade to a couple decades, from a point where they tortured me using one group at one time, to later introducing them into my life again as stalkers, they felt more secure about the idea that I wouldn't remember, because I had too many things to think about. So that's part of things. That's part of what the government did.